Listen here. Yeah, I am listening here. I decided to go early because the conservative lawyer that I'll be talking to, he's available a bit early, and so was I. So here in about 11 minutes, we're going to have ourselves a nice little chit chat. You're welcome, buddy. Pondering Politics live stream. Yeah, Kana boy. The Ryan McNally, the Peace Goes frenemy when it comes to Trump legal defense and that sort of thing. He and I are supposed to have a conversation. It was supposed to be a 6 for an hour right before Live and Learn, but I fucked up a bunch of recordings, so I was done early because there's no way I was going to go back and redo them. I was muted for 2 videos, supposed to be 2 additional videos today, and I was muted the entire time and didn't realize it until after I was done. So I said, fuck it. And so I've just been twiddling my thumbs. Fiance is out of the house, had nothing else to do, so we're going to do this a little early. Chuck U. Farley, hello from Colorado. What's up, buddy? Cone Prinz, hello, Josiah. How are you doing? I'm all right, man. I'm all right. How are you? Conaboy says, my favorite part about constitutional law is how it's all made up and fake. Yeah, I think the Trump v. U.S. decision, the Trump immunity decision, really drove that home. It's all about however we feel. Eventually, I want to get a bunch of people together and have a panel on judicial supremacy and how we technically live under it. For those of you who don't know, Conaboy, my Live and Learn co-host, he and I are judicial realists. We recognize that these judges claim to have a particular principle, particular jurisprudential prism, but they violate it whenever it's convenient. And, the liberal justices too. I mean, there's like a sense of pragmatism and practicality. They're all partisan political actors to one extent or another. Less so, I would say, in the aggregate than, an out-and-out politician, to be sure. But they're still partisan political actors to some extent. We need to stop pretending that they're not. They still have authority behind it, right? It doesn't change the fact that they're the Supreme Court of the United States, but we have to start being more realistic about what the Supreme Court is, what the judiciary is, and also have more checks against the judiciary, binding codes of conduct, enforceable codes of conduct, forensic audits done every year, anti-corruption measures. This idea that these people are 9 unelected philosopher kings that get to enjoy basically to be the final hand on top in our democratic republic is absurd when they're the least democratic branch. So I find myself in a position, as I've said on my channel, as I've said on Live and Learn, that though I am appreciative of the fact that the federal judiciary is trying to keep Trump in check, and I do think they should have some authority to keep presidents in check, I can't exactly say that I want to, replace Trump with, again, rule by 9 philosopher king fiat. Like Congress is meant to be the dominant branch. Congress is meant to be more powerful than both the president and the Supreme Court. And we, hopefully, we will eventually have a democratic trifecta that is motivated to reestablish that. But we'll see. H. Lawler, hi Josiah. Hey, how's it going? Chuck says, just getting ready for work. Well, I'm happy to keep you company as you get ready for work. And just have your earbuds in. We've got about another 8 minutes until Ryan is available. We're supposed to be talking, I think we're going to be talking pretty much about Trump and free speech and things of that nature. Ryan and I are very passive-aggressive on Twitter, which is fun. I like passive-aggressive bantering and sparring. But he is he says he voted Democrat until this past election, but he definitely, his public utterances indicate that he is a conservative for all intents and purposes. And he is not a huge fan of Trump and did not vote for Trump in the last election, but he said that if he had to choose between Trump and Kamala in the last election, he would have voted for Trump. But he felt that Trump was disqualified because of his shenanigans regarding the 2020 election. But he's like, if you forced me to choose between the 2 candidates on the merits, he said he would have chosen Kamala Harris. So, which is insane. So we're going to revisit that decision, particularly since he says his foremost value is free speech and First Amendment liberties and things of that nature. And Donald Trump is decidedly not a good figure for that sort of thing. Um, Greetings from Indiana. Love watching you young influencers like Luke, Adam, and so many more. Luke and Adam are killing it. They're doing so damn well. Midas Touch, which is the network that Adam is a part of, they're blowing the fuck up. They're just doing so many great things. I need to go live more because I do all right. You know, I'm getting close to 600,000 subscribers, and I do anywhere from like 10 to 15, sometimes 20 million views a month. I'm definitely the runt of the litter of like the quote unquote big dogs. I don't do what Adam and Luke do, but we got to get these viewers up. 130 viewers, guys. Come on, come on. You bless me with 6-figure view videos, and yet it's like a tumbleweed when I go live. It's painful. It hurts. It stings. It's a blow to my pride. Does Josiah have a Discord? Josiah should have a Discord, but Josiah does not have a Discord because Discords have never done Josiah any wonders whatsoever, and Josiah is spread way too thin as it is. Maybe once I get help, but yeah, that's probably a good idea. Conaboy 600,000 24-hour live stream special. There's no way. I am on my second energy drink for the day. I am sustained purely by rage and caffeine, so that's not going to happen. We've got the man himself. Ryan, what's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm doing good to see you again.
It's good to see you. Let me crank your shit up. Everybody in chat, let me know how the audio is. He sounds muted on my end, but it could just be on my end. Go ahead.
Is the audio okay now?
You just keep talking. You just keep talking. You tell me about your day, your week, and we'll let the audience decide while you monologue.
Glad to be back. This is a fun hobby for me, chatting politics, having interesting conversations. I did not get to indulge in it much this spring because I was on trial. So now that we're not done with that yet, but we're at the tail end of it, I'm starting to be able to have these conversations again, which I'm grateful for.
Is it premature or inappropriate to ask if you won?
We haven't won yet. It's a bench trial, so it's a weird situation where you go down, you have all the witnesses, the judge is there, you do the whole trial, but there's no jury, so you don't need a verdict at the end of the thing. You go home and you write, in our case, an incredibly long brief about what you think the evidence shows, and you submit that, and maybe the court wants oral argument, maybe she doesn't. We'll see. But so we'll find out if we won. But anyway, it's been a great experience and an unbelievable amount of work.
Well, I'm sorry for the amount of hours you were probably away from family. I assume it wasn't just your social hobbies. I imagine it was because you're married with kids, right?
Yeah. I was living in a hotel in Delaware for like 2.5 weeks. So it was it was a bit of a schlep.
That sounds like fucking paradise to me. Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate you agreeing to meet me early. I was telling them, it's actually kind of funny. I almost think that, don't take this the wrong way, but I think like you're a fucking pox on my life, and I'll explain why. So I was recording two videos. No, it's funny. I was recording 2 videos, and I get done with the 2 videos. I go to edit them, and I see in Premiere Pro, these pre-recorded videos I try to crank out anywhere from like 3 to 5 a day, that they had all the audio of the various clips and citations I had, but none of me. So it was, again, one of those situations where it's basically, and that's why I text you, I'm like, hey, I'm done early. I'm done, because I said, fuck it. I'm not going through this shit again. I'm not going to record this. I'm at the end of my tether. So, yeah, that's why I say you're a pox. Is the last time that happened in a big way was when you and I had our like 4-hour, it feels like 4 hours. Maybe it was 6, maybe it was 2. I can't remember. But when we had our first conversation, and it was the same thing. I had to tinker with settings in OBS, and sometimes I even mute it, like if I have to sneeze or cough, or if I'm taking a drink. But because I'm looking at the camera, I don't always glance down to make sure I hit the button properly. So anyway, just keep that bad fucking luck to yourself.
That's a key talent of lawyers, is making time stand still when we talk. That way we can bill you for it. So I'm unsurprised that the conversation felt timeless. It's a bummer though. It was I thought a really productive conversation. I think we had some interesting areas of agreement and disagreement. So some things are lost in the sands of time.
It's okay. We'll recreate it, I'm sure, organically. And I should ask before we get started: am I being billed for this time?
No, you're not my client. Okay. You're off the hook.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's start. Like, and again, I've got Live and Learn in about an hour and a half at 7 p.m. So we need to end this about 10 minutes before, so I can take a bathroom break and whatever. So let's try to be productive with our time, because you and I both like to talk a lot, which is great. It's one of the things we have in common, one of the few things maybe. So I know we didn't exactly discuss what like conversation parameters are, but like I know what my general beef with you is. I'm sure you have a general beef with me. It leads to fun, passive aggressive verbal banter, which I genuinely appreciate. You've got thick skin. You take it on the chin, you give it back, and we can shake hands and fist bump and walk away until we meet again to redo it in a week. So I don't know if you want to go first, and then I'll go first, and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, that's fine. My beef isn't really with you. It's more atmospheric in general, but I think.
Well, no, I want to be clear. I'm sorry. When I say beef, it's not personal for me either. It's So, but anyway, go ahead.
Absolutely. I decided to start talking publicly rather than just keeping it to myself, which is what I did for most of my legal career. In part because I think the risk reward calculus changed for a number of reasons, and it felt like safer to do so. But then also just because I felt the quality of the conversation was skewing in such a hyper-partisan direction. I think this really took off during the Obama years, but it really came to a head during Trump 1. I wouldn't say Obama years were immune from this, and they were certainly partisan before that too, but it's become its own horrible beast now. So to the extent that I have beef in a non-personal way with somebody like you or Pisco, it's the same beef I have with anyone who talks about politics from a purely partisan perspective, which is I know what you're going to say oftentimes before you say it, because I know, like the news comes out and your job is to figure out how can I make Trump look very bad and have a thumbnail that has a funny
To
clip
be
about
fair,
it.
to be fair, he often does my work for me. It's not that
Often
hard.
does?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
But
Yeah.
but that's kind of not my jam. And what I'm more interested in is trying to be in some small way a useful resource that would explain why do people think what they think. Oh, girls, sorry.
No, it's okay. And the good news is they're not on camera, so they're good.
There's a height thing. Yeah, let's be decisive. The wonders of being two. Every room is your room.
That's an amicus brief right there, right? Like I'm trying to get the legal jargon. That's a friend of the court right there. There's some friends of the okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
I don't think she was coming in to help me, but she was coming in one way or the other.
I'll be honest with you. I heard her clearly say that she takes my side in this. I'm just saying. All right. So I'm sorry. You were saying though about analyzing the news and everything.
Yeah, I just my interest isn't really partisan. My interest is trying to give as clear and honest a take as I can, and in some sense diffuse some of the hysteria around these things when it's warranted, and it often is warranted that some diffusion is necessary. So that's why some of the struggle sessions I have with Pisco, for example, where he we actually agree on the facts and we agree on the law, and then the next half an hour is him just being like, tell me how outraged you are, and me being like, that's not really what I do. And it's always fun.
No, I mean, I Pisco, friend of the show, friend of mine, Live and Learn co-host. Pisco, I'm so proud of him in so many ways. And one of the things that I respect about him that I do not emulate, he's a couple years younger than me, is he has an infinite level of energy. Like you two have a Batman Joker dynamic. I'll leave it to you both to settle who is who, in that you're destined to do this forever. But he has that same thing with Robin. Where he has that with so many people. He's like the fucking Energizer Bunny. He's Optimus Prime in the second Transformer movie. I'll take you all on, and he loves it. It fuels him. I do not have that. I am, as I said, spread thin. One of the things I try to do is Twitter is for what I do. It's a very useful news and update curating tool because it has the bookmark function, and you can actually categorize your bookmarks. Like you can break it down. Blue Sky doesn't have that. The problem with Twitter is that I'm then tempted to use it for great evil, for because I do love banter. I like the shit talking. I don't take it personally when people shit talk me. I love to give it back. But the problem is that's a fucking rabbit hole of time. And so now I'm engaged. I'll soon be married. I have no kids, but between that and a social life and everything else, I'm trying to find a better work-life balance. But Twitter has been a double-edged sword, and Pisco wields it masterfully. So
I
you
mean,
got
congrats on the engagement. That's fantastic.
appreciate it, man. I
And then,
appreciate
yeah,
it.
Twitter it's both fantastic and a black hole. I don't know how it's really like it's a cesspool and it's an infinite time suck. And, like, not that this is probably, I don't think there's any audience overlap here, but like, it's also a place where I found a lot of people who want to argue about political philosophy and host, like, so it's kind of everything and some of it's terrible. So that's, it is what it is.
Yeah. So I'm definitely looking forward. I think you guys are supposed to have another conversation soon. You and Pisco. Am I mistaken on that?
No, yeah, we had a really interesting chat. Basically, I think we've done about 4 hours on his gun to the head hypo, which was like, just for the backstory for people who aren't steeped in this particular lore. I didn't vote for either of the major candidates in the last election, and I didn't vote for them. My logic was the Democrats in my mind deserved to lose, and Trump was disqualified from my support. So, given that setup, there was, I feel like my choice was the right one. Pisco's hypo is he wants to get me out of you actually have a choice about how to support. You actually don't have to support one of the major candidates. You have other options. Gun to your head, you have to pick one. Which would you have picked? And I said, in that scenario, I would have picked Trump because the Democrats deserve to lose. So we spent about 4 hours on that. And I think we probably have another 2 hours to go.
I think you're being very optimistic, my friend. I think that is hilariously optimistic that you think it's just another 2 hours. It's another 2 hours for every fucking exchange for now, for the foreseeable future. But I appreciate that. Before you popped on, I gave that backstory too, because it was all publicly disclosed, and I said basically the same thing. And the only thing I'll add to it is, I believe you said, and I don't want to misrepresent you, so you correct the record, that the reason Trump disqualified himself is because of his conduct in the aftermath of the 2020 election, which you recognize he just got his ass kicked. He lost fair and square.
Oh yeah, he absolutely lost, and B, it wasn't. I mean, his conduct in the aftermath, and I'm specifically talking about the false slate of electors,
the fake electors,
not Jan 6th, the riot. That's a little bit to me. It's not a good set of facts, but it's not the disqualifying one. The disqualifying one is the false slate of electors, and then looking at him, what does that signify about who he is?
Sure.
And I think that I have there's a lot of times I can't read Trump. In this one aspect, I feel pretty confident because in my line of work, I work with and know a large number of very powerful, very successful businessmen. And there's a legal positivism is pretty common in that crowd. And, it's jargon, but what it basically means is, they say, we want to do this deal. And the lawyer says, I looked into it. I think that's probably illegal. And they say, well, how can you fix that? Right? Which is not uncommon. That's not like a crazy thing in a business person. And it's actually very common because that's what lawyers do. We come up with new arguments. We pursue gray areas. We come up with new theories. It's totally fine for private citizens. It's a bad look in public officials. And you don't want somebody with that level of power who, to use the phrase I think I used with Pisco, just doesn't care about the law. They don't think it has a moral dimension. Their question is, will it be enforced against me? And that's positivism, and it's not something you should want in a public official. So to me, that's disqualifying.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, it sounds like, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I know I do this. I hold public officials to a higher standard than citizens. I think that the expectation should be greater, even if the legal burdens are not necessarily thus. I do expect more. Again, I subscribe. I'm not much of a philosophy guy. Like I have a degree in political science and sociology, but political philosophy was merely just like a couple of classes that I had to take. I subscribe to the Uncle Ben from Spider-Man rule of philosophy: with great power comes great responsibility. And if you're the most powerful person on earth, you have the highest moral and ethical obligations, as far as I'm concerned. So like the January 6th thing, for me, like right now we're hearing a lot of regurgitation about, Trump and the National Guard, especially because he deployed the National Guard in Los Angeles over the objection of Governor Newsom, and that's being litigated in the courts. But What is uncontested is that he sat on his orange ass and watched the riots unfold for 3 hours without deploying the guard. And people will say, what about Nancy Pelosi? Well, she's not in the chain of command. Well, what about Mayor Bowser? She's not in the chain of command either. Well, what about all the other people between, the head of the DC National Guard and Trump? Well, simply because they didn't deploy the guard doesn't mean that Trump abdicated his responsibility. He is the highest level of responsibility. He sat on his orange ass and watched the insurrection unfold with the highest obligation to crush that insurrection, and he declined to do it. So I agree with you. The fake elector scheme is in many ways a lot worse, and it's also, more opaque as far as the public is concerned. They January 6th was such an incendiary televised event, right? That's going to sear into the minds of the American people. I agree. The fake elector plot probably is overall more sinister, but I would argue even his conduct on January 6th was disqualifying too. There's no figure in public office that had more of a responsibility, not the chief of the Capitol Police, not Nancy Pelosi, not Mayor Bowser, to crush that insurrection, and he chose not to. So I think both of those things are disqualifying, but I digress. So I take your point about your beef with. And again, it's not personal, but with what I represent, what PeaceGo represents. My beef, on the other hand, is kind of like the inverse of that, which is, the way I describe it to people is like, and I don't know how you would describe yourself. I say that I've heard you say that you voted for Democrats basically exclusively until this last election. From my interactions with you and from what I see you post on Twitter, you're certainly not MAGA, but I would regard you as a centrist or a conservative. I don't see you as a liberal in the modern political parlance, but that's just my estimation of you. But my position is like, I despise this notion of enlightened centrism. I don't like meatloaf, but if I'm starving and you offer me a plate of meatloaf or a plate of dog shit, I'm going to take the meatloaf. We can look at historical examples to give a more kind of a glaring situation. President Roosevelt, during the Second World War, his internment of Japanese Americans, that's super fucked up, but I would never put him as a moral equivalent to Adolf Hitler. So even though the Allies, certainly you could say with Dresden or with the civil rights abuses under President Roosevelt, certainly flawed, very flawed, worthy of criticism, the Axis were worse. The Union in the Civil War. You could say that President Lincoln violated civil liberties, suspending the writ of habeas corpus, accrued a lot of executive power, but the Confederacy was just morally inferior. And so I feel like sometimes in life, even though there are certain complexities, there's just one option that's worse than the other. And centrists, I feel, know that. Most of them are smart enough to know that, but it makes them really uncomfortable to say, fuck, those liberals who really get on my nerves, fuck, I don't want to give them this win. They're not as bad as Donald Trump, but I can't admit it, so I grade him on a curve. I think it's irrational. I think it's dishonest. I think it's incredibly stupid, and I think it's very common. And so what I'm trying to explore with you is, to what extent is your reluctance, like the gun in your head situation, is it, I'm trying to find out if something has changed, because I take your point from previous conversations I've either watched you have or I've had with you. Much of your advocacy was about how the Democrats were a threat to free speech, and I'll take that at face value. I'll just take it at face value. I'll concede that for the sake of argument. But to me, it says something, and I've got the clips pulled up if you haven't seen it. It says something to me that the organization that you look to as your North Star, FIRE, and I have fun with this, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I think
I'm a member of FIRE, so yeah.
Hey, congratulations! And I remember you saying that you were going to try to do work for them.
Yeah, member meaning I support the organization. I'm a card carrier member, but yeah, hopefully we can do some pro bono work for them soon. And
Gotcha.
They have correctly said that Trump's been worse, and I agree with them. I think Biden was. That doesn't mean Biden was good, by the way. That Biden was very bad on free speech.
And I think this is where we're missing each other. I just want to be clear, because this might be a short conversation, then we can just bullshit. Yeah. I'm not asking you. I'm really not. And this is maybe where I miscommunicate. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking anybody to fall in love with the Democratic Party. Believe it or not, I have major fucking issues with the Democratic Party. I'm a reason in more ways than one that the Democratic Party's approval rating is so low, because Republicans hate the Democratic Party, independents hate the Democratic Party, and Democrats hate the Democratic Party. Yeah, I am pissed off at this party, and it has serious issues.
You should be, by the way.
Sure.
You honestly should be.
Sure.
It's the craziest thing about our politics right now, and this is why I reject that kind of like meatloaf shit sandwich analogy you gave earlier, is because
Shit sandwich is actually bad. I should have used that instead of dog shit. Yeah.
but Trump has been, I think, even for his most hardened supporters, a disappointment of late. Like, I think if you look at like people who are like in the MAGA sphere, in the first 100 days, they were really happy. Like early on, let's not say first 100, maybe like first 20. And now that we're past the 100-day mark and there's been, Doge didn't really get anything done. The free speech issues do concern some people, not like the MAGA diehard, but some people. There's been just problem after problem after problem. I think a lot of people are disappointed, some of them for reasons that we would disagree with. But I think there are people who are quite disappointed with Trump, yet the only thing polling lower than Donald Trump
is the Democratic Party.
And
right.
The part of what I think was important about not supporting the Democrats in that election was, and like you said, I historically always have, is that there was a market enthusiasm gap. I think it started at like 20 million, but from Biden to Harris, it went down. I think it's more like 12 after all the votes were counted. I don't know the exact number, but that should be a warning sign and like a clarion call for self-reflection. Like, what did we do that caused us to lose so much support? And there's a lot of stuff there. And there was a moment in time where the Democrats had made tragic errors and they deserved to lose. The shame of it is that Donald Trump was running against them, because it would have been better if they lost to somebody else, but they deserved to lose, and that's who they lost to.
So that, like I said, I've got my beef with the Democratic Party, and I don't disagree with everything that you said there, and I think that merits a separate conversation as well. But the thing what I want to, I guess, deal with first is, like, you talked about people's reaction to Trump. The reason I think Fire's assessment, and I want to be clear exactly what they said again, folks. For those of you who have not seen it, we can play the clip. But Fire's executive vice president said in an interview with Mehdi Hassan that Fire's legal director said that Trump's war on free speech, and the exact quote is, unprecedented in scope, scale, and severity. In other words, the Trump administration is worse on free speech than the Biden administration as far as Fire is concerned, period. Now, people are free to disagree with that, and many in MAGA do. And as a matter of fact, that executive vice president, whose name escapes me, he says, like, what we're finding is, at least on the right, is that they cheerlead us when we were criticizing the Biden administration, and then we're finding out when the Trump administration's in power, they're actually not principled free speech defenders, they're free speech hobbyists, and that exists on both sides.
Oh yeah, but, I mean, look, this is the enemy of free speech is power,
right?
Always. So if you are someone who advocates for free speech, you will find that you are always in the unpopular position, because by definition, the people who won the election are now your enemy. That's how this goes. Trump has been, but it's not just free speech hobbyism. It was really funny. Like prior to Trump winning the election, I would commonly say, I never get purity tested by conservatives, which is good because I would fail.
Sure.
But the left purity tests me constantly, every other conversation. That's still directionally true, but you know what? Since Trump has come to power, I've been purity tested on the right. I've been told that, like, because I think we get back and forth about political prosecutions, and because I don't support them flat stop. Like, I didn't like the idea of prosecuting Trump. I also don't like the idea of him prosecuting people. I think political prosecutions are a bad idea. That disqualifies me from being conservative enough to have certain conversations. So I think it's the way it goes.
Fire's getting savage. Like, I check out, when I follow them, anytime that they publicly criticize or issue a statement against the Trump administration, man, it's a brutal fucking ratio. I mean, they're getting savage left, right, and center. But
they love it. They love it.
Oh, I know that it's they feed off the Schadenfreude, right? So, but here's my point, though. Again, the first thing to deal with, if you accept that the Trump administration has been worse in terms of scope, scale, and severity on First Amendment liberties, First Amendment protections, That's why I asked recently, when you and I had our most recent back and forth on Twitter, is if the election were held again tomorrow, and you have the benefit of knowing, okay, this is what the first 100 plus days of the Trump administration were, and you were faced with that choice again, in the gun to your head situation, would you still choose Trump over Harris, given that Trump has proven to be worse, at least than Biden, on the issue that you say is the most important to you?
Well, yes, I would. And it is a very important issue to me. There are many important issues. The thing I say about free speech is I agree Trump has been worse. For example, like the example that I think is the most telling one is actually the demand that Harvard provide him with video surveillance of protesters over the last, I think it was 5 years. I don't quite remember the period. I mean, when you're in a situation where the government is demanding Big Brother footage, that's the classic, whoa, what are we doing here? First Amendment problem scenario. There's nothing that could be used for that is not a free speech problem. And then, the woman who was detained and attempted to be deported for an op-ed was like another particularly striking example.
So there's Tufts University.
Yeah, there have been some very bad issues with Trump on free speech. I will say that while Biden was, I would agree, not as bad on free speech, there was a thing that Biden was attempting to do with free speech, which was, unlike Trump, who's very brazen and he does these things and they get struck down and they don't work, or they do, but you know what's happening because his whole MO is to maximize media attention on himself. So it's not happening behind closed doors. It's happening in a press conference. So it at least has that going for it, despite all the bad things that I think we would agree on. My concern with the Biden administration was that they were starting to build anti-free speech regulations and administrations kind of behind closed doors. Like what they were doing with Title IX on speech on campuses was very hard for people who weren't really in the weeds to follow. But it did mean that students couldn't talk about divisive political issues without risking their campus lives. And then of course the big example when they were, I can't remember the name of it. The Ministry of Information, I forgot the actual name for the organization they were attempting to start, which would have been an actual bureaucratic build of a anti-free speech government arm, which would have been terrible. Now, that does not make him worse than Trump, but I do think that those are important differences because I suspect that most of Trump's policies will not long outlive his presidency. I don't think they're going to last very long.
Okay, so that's a bold prediction. We'll get to that in a second. But let's just say I grant your premise that about these things. Here's one of the fundamental differences for me, because I get this all the time when it comes to related but separate issue, which was the so-called vaccine mandate. Okay. Now, I suppose it's not a free speech issue, but it did consider, First Amendment concerns, First Amendment liberties. When Biden attempted to impose this regulation by way of OSHA, that if you had a corporation or company that was more than 100 employees, you either had to have them tested every week, or there had to be proof of vaccinations, or there'd be fines. Right, there was 3 prongs to it. It was never actually implemented. It was challenged. I believe there were nationwide injunctions. There was a nationwide injunction against it. And then it was ultimately overturned by the Supreme Court. And Biden let it go. And to me, that's kind of a microcosm of the general posture of these two administrations, which is that when Biden got slapped down by the court, he was like, all right, touche. When Trump gets slapped down by courts, he doesn't take it on the chin the same way. He's much more likely to defy them openly, including the Supreme Court. And I think that that's another reason why that the acute threat posed by Trump, that's another layer of why it's more dangerous than whatever nefarious, slow-croaching free speech erosions you feared from the Biden administration. When they hit a judicial roadblock, they were much more likely than this administration across 4 years versus 100 and plus days, however many we're in. The Trump administration has defied the courts much more than the Biden administration. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to think of one example where the Biden administration just totally, declined to follow. I mean, when there was that Kaczmarek Amarillo, Texas, nationwide injunction on the FDA, Biden in no way, shape, or form signaled that, that the FDA would violate that, even though like AOC was calling for non-acquiescence. It's just, there was a posture of judicial deference from the Biden administration that I didn't see from the Trump administration. And that is with a conservative supermajority. Biden, you would think, would have a more adversarial posture because he's like, oh, these people are fucking right-wing partisan hacks trying to fuck me over. If this were Trump, they'd have a totally different lens. And so how does that factor into your equation? Trump defies the courts. Biden really didn't.
Well, I mean, I think in the broadest of strokes, what we talked about at the beginning, like Trump's kind of cavalier approach to the law was what disqualified him from my vote. So
sure,
it certainly did impact me. I'm laughing because the last time we talked, and there's no audio, so I can't prove this, but the last time we talked, your concern was judicial overreach.
Oh, fuck
and
yeah.
The whole time talking about judicial overreach.
Oh, no. I want to be clear. There's nothing incompatible about that at all. I'm saying that should come for you. The fact that Biden was, like, listen, again, sidebar, I still have deep misgivings about the relationship between the three branches under Trump. I am simultaneously grateful that there's a vigorous judiciary trying to slow him down, but I think the Supreme Court should be and was intended to be the weakest of the branches. I still believe that even under Trump. I think Congress is supposed to be more powerful than Trump, but they've all but abdicated their responsibility and consider themselves basically part of the C-suite. So that just has not changed at all. And that's why if you ever actually watch my videos, when I go over judicial rulings that go against Trump, I add that caveat in every time. I have fucking misgivings about this because I think trying to navigate where judicial review begins and where judicial review ends and judicial supremacy begins, I don't think that's a bright line at all.
I think it's a really fascinating area because I agree with you that actually some of the courts have been overreaching, and specifically, I think this was
with Trump or with Biden or both.
With Trump recently, but the example that's coming to mind is the Garcia rulings, where like the Supreme Court, I think, thread the needle very carefully. But when the original lower court ruling was to facilitate his return and effectuate his return. Now, facilitate, that makes sense to me. Like we say, the court's saying you did something wrong. You admit you did something wrong. It's not even a question. In your papers, you admitted this deportation was a mistake. So we all agree it's a mistake. You should fix it, right? That's totally fine. But in terms of judicial overreach, I don't think a court can order the president to enter into diplomatic negotiations with another country. I don't think a court could order the president to open trade negotiations with Cuba. They couldn't order the president to attack NATO. Like they just don't have power over the executive branch in that aspect. Now that's shitty because it might mean that in a case like this, there's a legal right but no remedy. Because if the executive branch just doesn't do anything, I don't know that the court can do anything about that. But it did strike me as overreach to say that you're going to effectuate this, when effectuate meant you have to negotiate with the head of another state, which the court simply cannot order the president to do. The Supreme Court, on the other hand, when they narrowed it to facilitate, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like, you can order the president to, you did something wrong, figure out how to fix this, which they've done, and now we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, I think it was correct of the Trump administration to throw a little bit of an elbow there. Now, if they had never done anything, we'd have another conversation, and I'd have a different position.
You think? I'm just curious because again, this is where, and I'm curious. Do you think that there was ever any judicial overreach with Biden? Because I'll give you again a separate but related example. So we hear a lot of Republicans bitch about nationwide injunctions, but they loved them 2 years ago, and so I'm taking a smug victory lap. It's like, listen. If there's this idea that there can be no nationwide injunctions against Trump, then the next time there's a Democratic president, you shut the fuck up and let him do whatever the fuck he wants. And if you're not going to be consistent in that, then we're going to have an issue. And that's exactly what most Republicans want. Oh, I can't believe there's nationwide injunctions against Trump. Then tell your boy Kazmarek down in Amarillo, Texas, to slow his roll. So was there ever any sort of judicial overreach in your estimation that you can recall against the Biden administration? Like maybe like the Mohila case about student loan forgiveness?
The student loan forgiveness case, there was a weird issue with that case, which was more technical. Like the standing issue is just kind of, I never understood how the Supreme Court figured that out, but that's, I think, more of an asterisk. The Biden, like, look, I don't think Biden was in the news legally the same way Trump is.
Yeah.
It just wasn't something that was being talked about as much. I think that he was slapped down by the courts correctly a few times that we've talked about. The student loan was also correct on the merits. The standing was a mess. So I can't think
but
of.
But isn't you're the lawyer, I'm not. But isn't standing, like, if I don't have standing, even if I'm right on the merits, you shouldn't take the case, right?
Correct. It
is a necessary precursor.
If I were a Supreme Court justice, I would have made the same on the merits decision the Supreme Court did on student loans, but I would not have granted standing, meaning that you would have had to wait and find a better plaintiff.
Gotcha.
Like the issue wasn't that Biden was right. The issue was that plaintiff just was the wrong plaintiff. But that's, kind of neither here nor there. I do think that this is kind of shades of what we were talking about with free speech, where people love it when they're not in power, they hate it when they are in power, and the Dems are kind of a resistance party right now, so they love it. I think that there could be something done to reduce the amount of forum shopping, because it is a little bit crazy that, like, now that the Democrats are resisting Trump, all these lawsuits originate in like New York and DC.
Sure. And again,
but when you're trying to screw over the next Democratic president, they're all going to originate in Texas and Florida. That strikes me as a problem that could use a solution.
Well, and I should say, and listen, for whatever it's worth, there were measures under, I think it was in the last year, the Biden administration, to try to deal with forum shopping, and Mitch McConnell shot it down. And this is part of the problem, where nobody wants to do it. The opposition doesn't. No one wants to unilaterally disarm, and I actually totally understand that. I remember when one of my senators, Tom Tillis, it was in a judiciary meeting, and I can't remember what it was about. Blue slips. I think, are you familiar with blue slips?
No, but you can fill me in.
Yeah, so blue slips are basically, in its tradition, there's nothing about it in federal statute or in the Constitution, but it's basically this tradition that the Senate has developed over decades, which basically gives senators from their states a bit of a veto over the president's judicial nominees. So if President Josiah tried to fill a judicial vacancy in Senator Ryan's state, Senator Ryan, Democrat or Republican, and it doesn't matter if we're in the same party, different parties, you could give your blue slip and say, Mr. President, this candidate doesn't work for me, you need to pick somebody else. And typically they've been honored. And then under the first Trump administration, when Republicans took control of the Senate, they did away with the blue slip tradition for circuit court judges, which would allow Donald Trump to appoint circuit judges over the objections of Democratic lawmakers in their states. And when Biden won and Democrats flipped the Senate, Republicans were pissed that Democrats did not restore the blue slip rule. And they were like, you started this. You're lucky that we don't do it for like district judges based on your precedent, which I advocated for. I think the only way at this point, we can talk about that separately too, if you disagree, to teach this version of the Republican Party a lesson is not to appeal to their better angels. That does not work. We've tried that. Is to do tit for tat. You hit me, I'm going to hit you back harder. And if you don't want to get hit, don't hit me, and we can both drop our fists. And that's the sort of thing where Democrats could have played hardball and chose not to. But that's something that when Tom Tillis, towards the end of the Biden administration, he was like, you guys should restore the blue slip rule now. You should do it now. And Democrats were like, no, what we can't do is have a situation where you created the problem for your political benefit, and then you want us to fix the problem on our watch also for your political benefit. That's not work. If you take for your political advantage, then if you want to close this loop, it has to be at your political disadvantage to balance the scales. But Republicans don't want to do that. And Democrats, I imagine, if the shoe were on the other foot, wouldn't want to either.
So it's really funny that you said that. And someone in chat just picked up on this thread where, so because I occupy something of a centrist position in these conversations, I get hit with this a lot. And what's funny about it is I get hit with it from partisans on both sides. So, I think, you take your point, like, oh, the Republicans violated this procedural norm, so we shouldn't just let them get away with it. If there's no consequences, they'll never stop. And then when I'm talking to Rob Knorr and he's saying, well, political prosecutions are bad, but the only way to make the Democrats stop doing them is just to prosecute them all. We're just going to put them all in jail until they learn that political prosecutions are bad. And my response in both instances is always the same, which is, since political prosecutions are bad, we should avoid them. Since monkeying around with long-standing procedural traditions that kind of safeguard the decorum and the dignity of the Senate or the House is bad, we shouldn't do that. And part of what I'm seeing is the problem with the duopoly, which is that when you're locked into this two-party system the way you get faction capture. And
I was about to say, hey, you're in there with me, buddy boy. Like we all live in this duopoly. Yeah.
No, but I mean, this is something the founding fathers wrote about, like the risks.
President Washington warned against it in his farewell address.
Exactly. Yeah. You have these political parties. They get co-opted by selfish and immoral people who are really looking out for themselves. And then because they're the only game in town, they just bounce off each other. And if we actually wanted to solve these problems that are emerging, I would suggest that the solution looks something like a viable third party, so that there's actually a reason to be better, not just a reason to be less terrible.
Yeah, so that's Chris Cuomo says something similar a lot. He's like, you need to be, what does he say? You need to be better, not as bad, or something like that. You need to fight for better. I can't remember how he has a clever turn of phrase that he uses all the time. Well, let's actually talk about that Rob Knorr example, because this is, again, is interesting. I try to be consistent here. When the Trump immunity decision came down, Joe Biden was president of the United States, and I was disgusted, not elated, at the notion that my preferred political party was in power at a time when this decision was made and the election was still effectively a coin flip. I was appalled. I was disgusted, because the truth is, I don't think Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or any Democrat should be entitled to that level of immunity. Like, my disgust with that decision was principled in the sense that it would have been easy to be like, fuck yeah, man, Biden is protected from Trump or any other Republican that comes down the pike. And instead I'm like, no, I don't trust my guy with that level of immunity, not just the opposition. And what's interesting is I found that Republicans kind of told on themselves there, because we also heard, obviously and I agree with this, but the thrust was that from the Democrats, that Trump was a threat to democracy and he was an authoritarian and a fascist and, would-be tyrant. But we actually heard similar rhetoric from prominent Republicans. The Biden administration, they're going to come for our free speech and our guns. They're going to make us, do a cotton swab if we want to log into Facebook or share a meme. But when presidential immunity came down, Republicans celebrated. So it's like, you really don't think that Joe Biden is somebody who abuses power and is a criminal president, because otherwise you'd probably be fucking freaking out at the notion, oh my God, this guy has at least 6 months left in his term, and now he's been cut a blank check from the Supreme Court. So I found that there was an asymmetry there, that I was principled, my side was principled, they were not. But the point about Rob Knorr is, I actually don't mind Republicans prosecuting Democrats. I don't mind Democrats prosecuting Republicans. The Biden administration prosecuted as many prominent Democrats as they did Republicans. Bob Menendez was prosecuted and successfully convicted under the Biden administration. Henry Cuellar was investigated, and others. Eric Adams, right? For every one, Dan Abrams, who is a centrist lawyer from Mediaite and ABC News, he's been beating this drum forever, that the MAGA allegations of political prosecution, that the DOJ was weaponized against Republicans and to the benefit of Democrats, is just not true. It doesn't bear out in who was prosecuted and how.
A political prosecution isn't the prosecution of a politician. A political prosecution is a prosecution with a political motive rather than like a legal motive.
Well,
right?
It's twofold. It's twofold. What we heard were claims that the DOJ had been politicized because, yes, it was targeting Trump for political reasons, and also in that it was going after Republicans and protecting Democrats. I don't think either of those things are true. Certainly the latter is not true. But my point with Rob is, and I don't know what Rob's position on this is, But I have no inherent objection, none, to the Trump administration. Like there was a judge in Wisconsin who I think is being prosecuted by Trump's DOJ, Judge Dugan. I did a video about this because it was shocking at the time, but I even said they're like, listen, we need to let this play out because this judge may have violated the law. And if a judge violates the law under the Trump administration, I'm fine with the Trump administration prosecuting that person. But that's the sword that cuts both ways. If a Democrat's in power, I don't think that, oh, fuck, this Republican obviously violated the law, but if we prosecute them, it's going to be for political reasons. No.
Can we maybe draw some distinctions that I think are helpful?
Sure.
Like when I say I'm against political prosecutions, that wouldn't extend at least as I use the term, to the federal case against Trump for election interference or the Georgia case against Trump for election interference, because I don't think either of those were like on their face politically motivated.
You think they had some merit to them at least?
I think they had some merit. And if you imagine like a veil of ignorance, where you're like, okay, we're going to go John Rawls, we're going to say we're going to get 100 prosecutors in here, we're just going to give them these facts, and they're of all stripes. I think you would generally have agreement that these are things that would make sense, right, to do. The New York case was not like that. The New York case was, if I'm going to be hyper charitable, we use the word novel theory in law, meaning it's an absolute new application of the law. It's kind of a stretch. No one's ever done this before.
Right.
And that isn't the sort of thing you should do when prosecuting a former president. That's crazy. Like if you're going to do it, it needs to be buttoned up by the numbers, as dispassionate and unpolitical as possible, which is exactly what that wasn't. Similarly, the documents case, I mean, like, look, he obviously was guilty. Like, there's no question he was guilty in the documents case. But it's just so ticky-tack. It's so, like, the thing about the documents case is that, as we saw with Biden, like, I think Trump was more obstructionist than Biden was, but everybody violates this rule. Everybody. So it's just not,
but can I
They had other options. They could have solved this problem another way, and they chose to make it a prosecution because it was good politically, which is a bummer. That's the sort of thing that I think
I'm not sure that that's. I'm not so. A couple of things. I'm not sure that that's true. I think that there's, I haven't dove deeply on this particular subject, certainly not in a while, but I guarantee you could find certainly now and probably contemporaneously at the time these things were happening, about as much evidence saying that this was a fucking, you were playing with live ammunition there, in the sense that I'm not certain that there was proof of an inherent political advantage to prosecuting Trump. Hell, right-wing pundits say that that's what got him reelected.
Oh, no, it backfired, but that doesn't mean, like, that's hindsight.
Well, I think again,
I mean,
we're not saying, I have to imagine, because like there was,
it wasn't as very well addressed. It was when he was pardoning Hunter. He accused his own DOJ of being politically motivated, which is really something because he's in charge of it. So, I mean, that's another topic, by the way, which is about like the Democrats and why they deserve to lose, which was, it did look like, because it was the case, that the Democrats were building an institutional presidency rather than a personal presidency. And that's a dangerous thing. And I think people didn't like that, correct?
So the thing is, though, I think it was understood at the time that this was going to be both legally and politically risky. I mean, shit, there was credit. This is why I have huge beef with Merrick Garland. I think that he was not the man for the moment. I think that history will look on him with contempt, because there was credible evidence that he dragged his feet prosecuting Trump because he was so afraid of how it would look to conservatives and to, approximately 50% of this country, which is why he, the directive basically was, I think the line was, you couldn't use the T word in DOJ meetings. You had to, even though you could argue, and some did argue, that on its face, what happened on January 6th alone would have justified a Democratic Attorney General on January 21st, 2021, one day after Biden was inaugurated, to say, I'm appointing a special counsel to look into what happened on January 6th, just based facially on the evidence. So I don't concede that. I take your point that maybe some people thought it would give them a political advantage, but I think the evidence showed that they knew it was risky no matter what. But my point is, again, getting back to Rob, is I just want to make it clear, and I don't care if it's Rob, I don't care if it's you, I don't care if it's anybody. I think that it is perfectly permissible for administrations of the opposition party to investigate crimes if they are committed by the opposition party. I think it's okay for Republican DOJs to investigate Democrats and vice versa. And I think we can't have a system, a functioning system, if the rule or tradition is, fuck, if you're in power, you can't, like, you bet your ass that I want the next Democratic president to be giving the Trump family a fucking colonoscopy based on this stable coin and meme coin and all the Qatari jet.
It'll never happen. It'll never.
He's going to pardon them. He's going to pardon them on the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's exactly where I was going, and that's why this is such a bad idea especially when it comes to presidents. Because if the norm becomes every time a president leaves office, we're going to put them under a microscope and we're going to file charges. We're going to figure out who in their family, who in their organizations did criminal things. Presidents can, as Biden did, and as I expect Trump will do, just pardon everyone before they leave office. So the whole thing now becomes like an open joke. And what happens is you start this spiral of prosecutions, and where you end is the rule of law is a joke. And
but isn't the rule of law joke? Okay, I take your point, and listen. Here's what I'll say. I know that is a risk. I'm saying I'd rather like.
It's not a risk. It's already happening.
Well, no. Well, I'm not necessarily sure that this is it's like inevitable at this point forward. But what I'm saying is, I would much rather. Like, it's so funny. It was so funny. MAGA people would try to dunk on me. Like, you better hope for Trump immunity, because if you don't get it, then that means the next Republican president is going to be investigating Biden, Obama, Clinton. I'm like, good. Fucking good. If those people broke the law, I think they're fair game, because it's not like they're totally vulnerable. You know, you have to impanel a grand jury. There's burdens of proof. There's, robust legal defense. Like this idea.
Of grand juries.
Say what? I know they indict a ham sandwich. Yeah. Fuck you. Yeah. But my point is, as I think, people who disagreed with the Trump immunity decision pointed out, including originalists like, Akil Reed, Amar pointed out, like, there are protections, at least some level of protection against vexatious litigation and, that sort of thing. Like, there's some protection people have. There's still a risk. But I'm actually more concerned about the other potential consequence, which is the most powerful man on earth, be it, a Democrat. I don't think that's likely. I think it's certainly more likely to be a Republican, more likely to be Trump. The most powerful man on earth being even less accountable to the law than he already is as a consequence of his position. And that's the thing that frustrates people like me and Pisco and others, is it seems like people like you don't give a damn and don't seem to think that that's a risk. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. You represent yourself here, but what's to stop that?
What you're pointing out is a political problem with a political solution, not a judicial solution. And it can't have a judicial solution. And we've seen this play out. Like, you bring the charges, and because you asked that question, can we prosecute a president? Now we have the answer, broad immunity. If you hadn't gotten broad immunity, the next question up was, can a president pardon himself? And we would have found out the answer to that too. Like, the president, as much as there's like a popular conception, like no one's above the law, we do have these kind of like, they sound good, they make us feel good platitudes. The president is not a regular person. And the office of the presidency is not a regular person when it comes to what the law is and how it functions. So, yeah, I mean, I think that what we're discovering is that the attempts to do what you've described have led to broad immunity, may lead to the idea of a self-pardon, have led to, and almost certainly will lead to, a practice of the president pardoning everybody in their immediate family and business contacts and everyone who they possibly think would be interested in a pardon before they leave office. So what you end up with is no functional prosecutions and a dirtied up rule of law.
Can I use a really, see, this is
just a disaster.
I don't buy this, and I don't think you buy this too. See, I'm going to use a really crass metaphor. Ryan, that would be like you telling the victim of an abuse not to defend themselves, because right now you have a broken jaw. If you defend yourself, you're going to be beaten into a coma. You would never accept that, right? This idea that...
victim in this metaphor?
Say what?
Who's the victim in this metaphor?
I suppose the victim would be the notion that presidents are not above the law. This idea that Trump, that criminal presidents, again, we'll just take Trump out of it, that criminal presidents should not be prosecuted, because if you go down that road, it will have unfortunate consequences, that it will backfire. I believe.
Well, but not it may. It did. It has. We've already seen it. So what are we talking about? Like, not only are you not getting a conviction, you have an immunity decision that you hate, and we're probably going to have an expansive practice of pardons going forward that will prevent any even remotely similar prosecutions.
It did, but that did one did not necessitate the other.
Well, no, it did, because the immunity decision is right. Like, it's right on the law. It is
okay.
It is correct.
Says you. Listen, you have me at a disadvantage.
Supreme Court.
So wait a minute. So wait a minute. You can't say that, because if the Supreme Court says that Trump must facilitate and effectuate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, they're right and you're wrong. Like, you clearly don't believe. This is the problem with judicial review becoming judicial supremacy. As a matter of practicality, yes, we have accepted that what the Supreme Court says is right simply by virtue of their decision. But in terms of whether or not we agree with it, like, there's no fucking way you agree with every Supreme Court decision ever made, including those.
I agree with every Supreme Court decision. I'm saying you said.
So you're wrong and they're right.
Wrongly decided. I say it's rightly decided. We can get into it if you want to, because I'm happy to have that conversation. But given the fact that I'm a lawyer and the Supreme Court agrees with me, it seems that just the fact that we have a disagreement of opinion doesn't really strike me as a compelling reason to say that the opinion was wrongly decided.
Well, that's why I said I'll leave. I'm happy to leave that to, you're going to kick my ass on this. Pisco's going to kick your ass on this. So I'm happy to go hide behind it. I'm happy to go hide behind his skirt in this respect.
Like, after another 6 hours on my struggle session, and then another.
Bro, you guys, I don't recall you ever dedicating. You do need to dedicate 6 hours to the Trump immunity decision. I'll do what any good layman political scientist does when matters of the law come in. I'll appeal to original scholars who agree with me, like Akil Reed Amar and others like it as well. William Bode of the Federalist Society, the Heritage Foundation, a good originalist and good standing, and others as well. I guarantee you, I'll bet you $20 on this. I'm prepared to do this. Pisco might be like, no, don't do it. But I think Pisco will back me up on this. We could find, if we I don't know, all the various attorneys and legal scholars who have given a public opinion on this, I'll bet I can find more reputable scholars siding with me than you on this.
I mean, it's kind of a silly thing to even get into. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because I talk about this Pisco a lot.
Yeah.
This is, I think, one of the hazards of the profession, is that we have a huge credibility problem, because, like, literally professionally, my job is you can pay me to have the opinion you want me to have.
And I think you have been paid. I think the Trump people are paid you right now to have that opinion.
No, but when you see lawyers who are in media and they're kind of like, they're taking a side and they're always on the same side, and I love a lot of them. And a lot of them are great people. I mean, like, Andrew Weissman is always on the circuits. He was a professor of mine, and he's an amazing professor. And
man, you should have listened more to Professor Weissman. What the fuck, Ryan? What the fuck, man?
Wonderful lawyer. But the point is, in this line of work, you can always find a lawyer. You can always find an expert. It is what it is.
No, listen, I just, again, since we're speaking informally here in a civil way, I just gotta say, it weirds me the fuck out that people who take your position are just so, like, this. That was my beef with the Trump immunity decision. Like, Roberts got so haughty with the dissent, and at one point at least addressed Justice Barrett's concurrence with respect vis-a-vis bribery, and Robert's tone in the majority opinion was so fucking snide, and it was like you could have done everybody a service if you were going to come out to the shitty decision and pre-butt people's concerns. Instead, he picked the worst of both worlds. He shit talked like this concern. People shouldn't be fucking worried about this. It's not a big deal. Never explaining why. The concern about a rogue president is one. The blasé attitude towards it from the right is really weird. And again, to me, it betrays an insincerity when people talk about the overreach of the left. It's like, you guys clearly aren't worried about a rogue, unaccountable Democratic president, maybe because you know that they can actually be entrusted to respect judicial rulings, which run contrary to their views, more than people on your side. In other words, the reason people celebrated the Trump immunity decision is because they knew it inherently gave their guy an advantage, and that Democrats, elected Democrats who tend to be morally superior, certainly to MAGA Republican politicians, will not abuse it. And so it's like, where's your concern about this?
You just said a whole bunch of stuff I disagree with, so I'm going to have to try
lay it on me, big boy.
I'll try to figure out how to pick that through in a useful way.
Well, first, let's deal with the first part. Where's your concern? Are you not concerned? Are you telling me it's impossible, or you're just going to like, let's break it down, let's do it Socratically. Is it impossible for a rogue president from this immunity? Is there any negative consequences as a consequence of the Trump immunity decision?
The solution to a political problem is political.
I understand that. So is that a yes? Is that a yes? Do you think this decision?
By the way, I thought that beforehand because I thought the immunity outcome was correct. Meaning, before it was decided, that's what I thought the law ought to be if this came up. So in advance, you wanted a president with sweeping immunity. And it concerns me so much, and I don't know how to fix this problem. People imagine that the law is people sitting in a room twirling their mustaches and saying, "What do I think? What is the best outcome here?"
I'm asking you, Ryan. You've already made it clear you felt that the law is
the Constitution. Wait a minute.
Listen, you've already said you agree that the legal interpretation, in your opinion, is correct. That's fine. I take that. I accept that. I'm asking, what do you want? What did you want? If the Constitution were written by you, Ryan, would there be presidential immunity of the nature that we now are forced to deal with?
That's a good
question. I'm not gonna I know I'm just putting you on the microscope here, but
I've never thought about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm on the spot. I think right now my concern about political prosecutions is high enough that it seems like an awfully good idea. And if you're going to give the president the pardon power, you kind of have to give him this immunity, because otherwise you have to say he can't pardon himself.
What about a qualified pardon power? See, that's the thing.
It'd be a very, very different constitution.
Oh, I'm sure that it's just, I don't know, man. I'm as somebody who's bitten the bullet about the risk of political prosecutions, and I know Pisco's done it as well, and I know you had conversations with Destiny about that. Pretty much everyone concedes that, but it's really chilling and really weird, speaking on behalf of everybody who disagrees with your decision, that there's just there's almost like a laughing off of so what if the most powerful man on earth is effectively unaccountable? I don't get that, especially from right-wingers who say they fucking value liberty and they don't want an all-powerful.
He's unaccountable in the sense of prosecution, if that's what you mean. The solution is political. That's what it is. The solution is, if it's going that badly, presumably you get some kind of impeachable majority in Congress. If it's going that badly, presumably he's punished in the next election cycle. That's the solution to a political problem.
What if he's on a second term? What if he's on a second term? What if it's the last year of his second term? This is what I mean. Come on, man. Be reasonable. Be like, you know what, Josiah? Yes, it is a problem, and it is a serious threat. I think this other thing is more of a threat at the moment, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's not a threat.
The problem I'm having with this is that, for example, you use the word rogue quite a bit, and I think you and I have agreed early in this conversation that President Trump has done many things that are unconstitutional or illegal, or at least deep within the margins, right? And I think that's all being litigated, so we'll find out which ones were and which ones weren't. I don't think he's done anything that I would describe as rogue in his second term. I think he was very clear when he was running for office that he was going to do.
Rogue is in unlawful,
basically,
right?
All of these things.
Rogue is in unlawful. He's done plenty of unlawful things, which is why the
courts. Well, I mean, then you're talking about so if a president, for example, has a policy that is struck down, that's rogue because it's unlawful.
If they then comply with the court ruling, if they're like, "Fuck, okay, my bad, I didn't know."
Okay, so So like if what Trump does with like Harvard, for example, right? If that goes up to the Supreme Court and he loses, and then
It shouldn't have to go to the Supreme. Like that's the
he backs off, then he's not rogue in your mind.
Well, it also
Like,
I would say under our current system applies to lower court judges as well. Like when when a judge rules against an administration, I think the obligation is you have to obey that judge's ruling even if you're going to appeal it, right? So Trump has openly defied, I mean, going back months and months, like with the like rescission of funding under Doge and shit like that as well. And district judges were saying you can't shut this funding down, you can't do this, you need to resume the dispensation of funds and blah, 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 blah. I mean, he's defied court orders multiple times, at least lower court orders. And then again, with the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, he defied the Supreme Court on that. Eventually, he complied. But
the Garcia case is the example I brought up earlier for that exact reason, which is that there are instances where the executive can and should push back on judicial overreach. Now, Doge is different, though, right? Because the control over the purse is very much not a unique presidential power. So, there, I think the concerns are totally different. But when you're talking about, ordering the president to negotiate with the head of El Salvador, I don't know that I don't know that a district court, I don't know that the Supreme Court has the power to do that. And you would.
What if the Supreme Court says it does? What if the Supreme Court says it does? What if
then you have a legit constitutional crisis because the Supreme Court is ordering things that it doesn't have the power to do.
But they're right? Because if they rule it, it's right.
Well, it's going to be what you're going to have is a constitutional crisis, which will then be resolved, and whoever wins ends up being the law.
I'd probably bet on the president in that situation.
I would too.
Yeah.
And the court is correctly gun shy about these sort of things. This is going way back because you said
they're fucking not with Democrats, man. I'd love to see some more gun shy behavior when Democrats are in charge.
On the immunity decision, just because you said a few things I didn't respond to. Justice Barrett's concurrence was the correct opinion. That was by far the best opinion. So, like, if anything should have been the law, it should have been her. So I'm 100% in agreement that she was right about basically everything. In terms of why, though, a majority opinion doesn't say certain things, writing a majority opinion is really tricky because you can't put any language in that's going to lose you the votes of the majority. So majority opinions tend to be really narrow and deciding only specific issues. And oftentimes, even a majority of the majority would like to write something, but if they wrote that, they'd lose the fifth vote. So they have to be even narrower than they want to be. Whereas in a concurrence or a dissent, you can write whatever you want. So those tend to be a lot more sweeping, and they tend to get into issues a lot more deeply. It's just kind of the nature of the beast.
I understand, but what I'm saying is listen, I know it doesn't change. I know it doesn't change the legal force of this opinion, but this opinion was wildly unpopular. And I think that Roberts, not only on the merits of the decision, made it unpopular. I think the decision itself was inherently unpopular, not just among legal scholars, but also just the American people on its merits, but also with Roberts' tone. I think a lot of people, and I saw this complaint, it's like, damn, okay, well, if we're supposed to, if your power derives from our belief in your legitimacy, we the people, you could do yourself a fucking service by saying, hey, all you people, again, because the polls were concerned about a rogue president unaccountable. Roberts basically told the majority of Americans, you're being hysterical, shut the fuck up. But I'm also not going to explain why you're being hysterical. I'm just going to insult and mock you by way of attacking the dissent, Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor. I think he didn't do himself any favors there. I think if you're going to adopt that tone, you should explain, hey, guys, this is why this isn't a big deal. When you're worried about an all-powerful king, here's why you need not worry about that. And instead, it had all the insults and the derision and the disdain, but none of the comfort. And I think he took a bad situation made by a bad decision and made it even worse. He didn't have to do that. He could have cut that out. You
articulated beautifully the argument for lifetime tenure. One of the great things about our system is that the Supreme Court does not have to care about the polls and should not care about the polls. And
should they care about legitimacy? Should they?
They do, but I think if you ask them, that was legitimacy enhancing, and if you ask me, it was legitimacy enhancing because they made the right call.
No, I understand, but the truth is, we know that to some extent, the courts do care about popular opinion, because whether you like it or not, whether they like it or not, popular opinion is a major, not exclusive, major ingredient in what we consider legitimacy, what we, the people, view as legitimate. So while the court very often makes unpopular decisions, like there's a reason that, just like these are not apolitical actors. There's a reason that Roberts has actually issued, I think, back-to-back rare rebukes of Trump, talking about impeachment and things of that nature. He's aware of what's going on in politics. They buckled to pressure on some level. I would argue it's a half-assed measure when it came to the binding code of conduct, because he saw the polls, he saw the pressure, and like, oh, just trust us, bro. We're ethical isn't good enough. So I think it was 2023, they put pen to paper and published a binding code of conduct. It was fangless. I think it was insufficient, but that was something. Anyway, we disagree. And again, it's also kind of interesting where you don't seem to support judicial supremacy. You seem to share my views that, there is a notion of judicial overreach and trying to, contextualize the relationship with the courts, with the other two branches. But you seem to also want unaccountable justices.
No, I'm a federalist, a small government federalist, but a federalist. Like I think the Constitution did a wonderful job of articulating the branches of government and also what is and is not for the federal government in general, and that there's a delicate balance there that has been overturned, basically, and that because the system is unbalanced, it's churning and it's doing things we don't want it to do. It would be better if it was balanced and it was actually running the way it ought to run. But my concern, to take your point, going back to our original theme, I'm not partisan in the sense that I'm always going to be talking about judicial overreach or always going to be talking about executive overreach. My concern is making sure that everybody stays in their own box, and that the judiciary does what the judiciary is supposed to do, the president does what the president's supposed to do, the federal government does what it's supposed to do, the states does what it's supposed to do, which, by the way, is why I'm an originalist, because attempting to keep all the branches of government where they ought to be is the animating force behind originalism.
And remind me, your version of originalism doesn't factor in legislative history, what the founders or framers of a particular statute or constitutional provision intended, right? You don't factor that in.
Intent, no. Legislative history is kind of, I don't know if you've ever looked at legislative history for a bill. It's a mess. Like, the problem with legislative history is that you can just pick your friends and it says anything you want it to say. Like, imagine if 100 years from now, people were asking about a law, like the big, beautiful bill gets passed, let's say. And they're like, God, we got to figure out what this means. Let's look at the statements of Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's like, it doesn't, it's a nonsensical record. In terms of the Constitution, the version of originalism that I espouse doesn't look to the intent of the founders, because intent is kind of like how do you figure it out? It's like you imagine what George Washington.
Maybe their journals, maybe like records, records of the conversations, like the ratifications.
What you look toward instead is what it was publicly understood to mean. So you look for records of what people understood at that time that the term meant.
Couldn't you look at other records about what they intended when they wrote it's an interesting how you split one out. Like, no, we don't want to look at, like, because we have a lot of records, particularly the ratification debates, about what this representative said here and what this one said here about the speech and debate clause, for example, and even the notion of immunity. There were amicus briefs filed in the Trump v. immunity decision, painstakingly detailing like the overwhelming evidence that the framers did not intend for the chief executive to have criminal immunity. And nobody disputes that the weight of the history, the legislative record, sits squarely on the anti-immunity side compared to the pro. So it's interesting how we'll look at public records when it's convenient, but not other times. I don't understand that. But
originalism isn't designed to be perfect, and I don't think anyone who is honest about it says that it is. What it does is it creates a set of principles that you can apply consistently in order to come out to outcomes that you like. Now, you might think that that doesn't happen. Fair enough. But the thing is, even in this conversation, you've ascribed to me intent 4 or 5 times, right? Like, I don't think you really believe that. I don't think that's, which I've done to you.
But I told you Hey, on your microphone cutting out there.
The reason I do it 0 times is because what's secretly in your heart of hearts really shouldn't matter. What matters is the positions that you're taking and defending, and the positions I'm taking and defending. And I'm more than happy to talk about the things you actually say rather than trying to imagine what it is that you think.
I will close the loop on the originalist thing, and then we'll go all the way back. We'll end where we began, which is about Trump and free speech and the gun to your head question. All I will tell you, and I say this with affection, what I'm hoping for is that the next Democratic president puts enough fear into conservatives to make them seriously reconsider their priors. Like, just test them a little bit. I think the next Democratic president should have fun with the immunity decision. Be like, okay, you guys are all principled conservatives, right? No big deal about all-powerful chief executives. I'm going to fuck with you a bit using this immunity and see how you like it. And we'll see where the cards are. Like, you know what? Even though it's really uncomfortable at the thought of a AOC cackling on top of a mountain in front of her cauldron, summoning all the powers of her presidential immunity. Damn it, I am such a principled legal scholar. I stand by it. It was still the right decision, because I bet maybe you wouldn't fold, Ryan, but I bet you a lot of people on your side would fold.
Let's go back to where we started, since we're circling the conversation. I think and getting the lead out. I think it's bad to get rid of protections for the dignity of the office, because it's bad to do it. I think it's bad when Democrats do it. I think it's bad when Republicans do it. I think it's bad to have politically motivated prosecutions, regardless of who's doing it. And what I've seen in these conversations is that no matter how good their intentions may be, and I'm not going to pretend I know them, when I talk to partisans, the consistent take is, well, if we just punch the other side hard enough, surely they'll learn the lesson this time. And I guess we're going to find out, because you guys seem to be ascendant, and my view is politically unsustainable minority that nobody gives a shit about. So that's fine.
If nobody gave a shit about it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'm just saying, I like I said, I think because of your views, and because of the views of a lot of people on the right, I think that the people who support the presidential immunity decision have not seriously contemplated if the shoe was on the other foot, and that sort of awesome unaccountability were in the hands of an opposition party. Again, I think the right told on itself with all the shit I heard from not just partisan actors, but legal scholars as well, people in the Heritage Foundation. Joe Biden's a tyrant. He's, it's unbelievable. It's lawless administration, but also we support presidential immunity at a time when Joe Biden's in power. They told on themselves. They knew that Biden would not abuse that.
Do you know the case, Texas v. Johnson, the can you burn your own American flag case?
Yeah.
So famously, Justice Scalia was the 5th vote saying you can burn your own American flag. And famously also, Justice Scalia really would have preferred to throw flag burners in jail. His personal preference was that if you're a flag burner, you should go to jail. But he looked at the Constitution and determined what the law was. And what the law is different than your preference. And if you're talking about telling on yourself, every time I talk to you or talk to Destiny or about the immunity decision, the conversation always has this linguistic tick of, well, this is what you prefer. This is what it ought to be. This is what
you could clarify. That's what I was asking you, man. You could have said.
When I talk about the immunity decision, I'm talking about it is correct. It is the Constitution we have. This is the correct outcome.
Listen, I can't speak for Stephen. I can speak for me, but I know what a lot of people are looking for is that Scalia moment, that if you're going to stand on business, would you at least look, a lot of people, that's a great example. A lot of people were, believe it or not, why do you think Scalia put that in there? Why do you think Scalia conceded, like, listen, I don't like this. I don't like the practice of flag burning.
Was it in the decision? I think I remember from his speech.
I thought it was, but you're right. Maybe it was a discussion afterwards. But why do you think Scalia articulated that? I have a theory about one of his motivations.
Well, I mean, if I'm going to be, I don't know, but I think that in the context where I heard him give the remarks, he was using it as an example of why originalism is valuable.
In other words, he was using it. He was making a confession about a preference to be persuasive. I think he was trying to persuade people.
He's a lawyer, of course. Yeah.
Right. I think you would be more persuasive if you if you conceded, yes, this is incredibly risky and it is incredibly dangerous, but I stand with the decision because of X, Y, Z. You don't even give me the first part. You skip straight to the end. You're like, the legal decision is right. I'm looking for that Scalia moment, Ryan. And I'm not going to put you on the spot. You chew on it. You think about it for our next conversation. But I'm looking for that Scalia moment where you say, Josiah, yes, the Trump v. immunity decision, I've got some serious misgivings in terms of its practical implications. What might a President AOC do with the awesome power of immunity? You know, I could conceive of an aggressive progressive using that unaccountability in ways that make me incredibly uncomfortable. But I still stand on the merits.
Of course, bad things could happen. Yeah, I mean, I think that's obvious. But the question you had asked earlier was, if you could rewrite the Constitution, would you include this immunity?
Yeah, that was that, and I want you to chew on that one too.
That requires me to weigh. Like,
I totally understand.
Are there cons? Yeah, obviously, but like then I have to weigh the pros and cons.
Right. No, and I want you to chew on that. We can talk about that different time, because one of the practices that I've done, it's like a creative writing exercise really since college, is a friend of mine, how do you phrase it? Like the original prompt came out of nowhere from a buddy of mine who's now, he does campaign finance software. He was like, okay, just imagine you are given control of Venezuela. He just picked a country because it's like rich in natural resources. It's not the United States. It's not a superpower. And you could recreate the government, and you could try to make a functioning government that was as bad faith proof as possible. What would you do? And so I graduated in 2013. So for like 12 years, this has been like an ongoing mental project of mine of like, what would that look like? And so that's why I posed the question to you. So you chew on it and get back to me. Now, closing the loop entirely. Now, knowing or conceding, as you have, acknowledging, if that tastes better going down, acknowledging that Donald Trump is, as Fire says, worse, that he is, that his war on free speech, again, unprecedented in scope, scale, and severity. And by the way, that's from like 2 months ago, right? So that was in like the first 3 months of the Trump administration. I can't imagine what they're probably like 5-alarm fucking fire now. If that election were to be held again, would you said, again, you didn't vote for Trump. He was disqualified. You felt the Democrats deserved to lose. But if you had to choose, then you would have chosen Trump. Knowing now that Trump is worse than the party that deserved to lose on the issue that is one of, if not the most important to you, which is First Amendment liberties, gun to your head, would you make a different choice knowing now what you did not know then?
No. That is a very, very important issue to me. And Biden was terrible on it. Trump is worse. I agree with all of those things. But the things that made me think Biden Harris and deserve.
I understand. It's a metonym or a synecdoche or whatever.
Well, I mean, it's actually that's one of the things on the list. Like the big ones were that they seem to be on the verge of taking some of the very bad ideas that sprung up during the kind of like the summer of love and the COVID years and moving them into government policy where they might become permanent and lasting. And we saw that in their support of the affirmative action cases, their support for the use of quotas on the basis of race and sex at many levels. In fact, as what David Hogg showed us, the DNC still has a quota system today because they like quotas of this nature. They were also, to be totally honest with you, obviously lying about Biden's health and mental acuity for a long period of time. The Her report turned out to be, at the time people were minimizing it, it turned out to be absolutely prophetic. There was an enormous problem with Biden and who knows how long that was. I'm not saying he was mentally infirm the whole time. I think that's an overreach. But clearly in the last couple of years, that was probably more of an institutional presidency than it was a personal presidency. And then Harris was running on essentially inauthenticity. And the first thing that she did when pressed was to reach into that same playbook of bad ideas. And I don't think there was any reason.
Which was what?
Oh, like, for example, she's using the blackmail. Polls showed she was losing support in the black vote, particularly black men. So the first thing she did, her first idea was, let's have government programs that specifically give money to black men. That's a bad look. That's
I don't want to straw man you, but I'm almost like incredulous here. So I want to make sure I understand because so it's a confluence of things. You would still make the choice that you did, or still have the preference you did. You would still prefer Trump if the election were tomorrow, because Biden was in a state of cognitive decline. You felt the Democrats were dishonest about that. It was an institutional presidency. There were quotas and DEI,
which were going to be looked like they were going to be enacted into law, or at least given cover for under law.
and that is more, in your estimation, that is more nefarious and threatening to people's liberty than the evidence we've seen of Trump in the first 100 days or more.
I think they were very, very bad ideas that deserve to be soundly defeated. Are you familiar with Ibram X. Kendi?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, his famous line, past discrimination, I'm paraphrasing now. I wish I could remember it. Past discrimination requires future discrimination is basically the paraphrase. If you're asking me, do I think it's a good idea to create a system of government that discriminates against my children? No, I think that's probably a bad idea. That's probably something I'm not in favor of. I'm also not in favor against discriminating against anybody else's children. But I think there were some very, very.
So as a practical matter, just a sidebar, just so I can. You don't think there's any like actual restitution that the federal government can or should make against past or lingering effects of like social iniquities, right?
There is, and the case law says that they can in certain circumstances. But then what happened was that was coupled with a linguistic shift, right? So like when that law came out, like with Grutter, for example, they said you can have affirmative action to repair these past inequities, but it has a 25-year cap and blah blah blah. Like it shouldn't be forever because we know that reverse discrimination is still illegal, is still wrong, but maybe you should do it in this case. What happened in 2020, one of those basket of bad ideas is that the concept of harm became very nebulous and it became disconnected from anything that anyone in the civil rights movement would have pointed at as like a harm. We're talking about microaggressions and blah blah blah. The concept of harm became diffused such that when you looked at when affirmative action went to the Supreme Court, Harvard was taking the position and Biden was defending the position that this never will end. This is an ongoing process and we can't imagine a situation where we ever stop discriminating on the basis of race. That strikes me as problematic. That doesn't strike you as problematic?
This notion of discriminating in any way, what you call reverse discrimination, does strike me as problematic. But I'm just more sympathetic to this idea that I think, yes, by definition, restitution, you kind of rob Peter to pay Paul. I think just by definition. I haven't thought about it at length. I just think inherently that's probably the case. But regardless, I don't think that there's anything inherently nefarious about that. Let me put it to you like this. Even if I took your objections, even if I agreed or were more sympathetic to your objections than I am, I think that there's actually a noble pursuit. I don't think there's anything inherently nefarious, I should say, about the pursuit of equity or racial, correcting for racial injustice, things of that nature, DEI. I do think most of what Trump is doing with respect to free speech is inherently, obviously nefarious. I think targeting law firms because they've represented people you don't like. I don't think there's a plausibly good faith rationale by Trump for that, other than, he's made it very clear, right, with his public utterances.
Can I put a pin in the law firm one, just because I'm very limited in what I can say about that?
That's fair. But all the other examples too, for all the reasons that Fire lays out, I don't see evidence of a noble principled pursuit there, and it could just be because, as you say, Trump is just much more in your face about it. But that's still evidence I have to consider. I think that Trump is an inherently malevolent actor, not looking for a noble crusade. I think that at the worst, I would say that what the Democrats did, this is worse. This is the biggest concession I would give, is that it was well-intentioned but ultimately wrong policy. I don't see that with Trump. I think it's bad policy with Trump and also malevolent intentions, and this is one of the reasons I view him as worse. But again, that's just a different set of like value propositions. I disagree fundamentally. I think that Trump is such an acute threat that I have a hard. I'm surprised that your answer is what it is, but I appreciate you giving me that. And I also just don't share your optimism that this goes away with Trump. I see no limiting principle in Trump's Republican Party. I have no reason to believe that it will fade. His heir apparents, to the extent that he has any, this next generation people like Ron DeSantis and Don Jr. and J.D. Vance, they drink from the same well. And in many cases, they're smarter than he is. Ron DeSantis is smarter than Trump. I think J.D. Vance is smarter than Trump.
Much.
And I think they both have this like deep right-wing authoritarian impulse. And in J.D. Vance's case, I think he's wildly unprincipled. At least I can say this as far as I know about Ron DeSantis's public career. He's been relatively consistent as far as I know. J.D. Vance used to be one of Trump's most outspoken critics, and Trump didn't change. Vance did for political convenience. So
I think what this is going to boil down to, and I have a big follow-up to what you said, but it's so long, I'm mindful of the time. Have you read Sowell's work at all?
Thomas Sowell?
Yeah. A Conflict of Visions?
Conflict of what?
A Conflict of Visions.
No, I've not read that.
All right, let's put a pin in this, talk about it next time, because what you talked about was like pure political theory that could have come out of his textbook. It was incredible, but we'll circle back to that later. What I'm hoping for is that there's what emerges from the ashes of the Democratic Party is somebody new, somebody who doesn't have the baggage of the ideas in 2020 that made the Democrats so unpopular, and somebody who's willing to run as a common sense Democrat. Because whenever Democrats win, at least in my lifetime, it's because they're running as common sense Democrats. When they're asking you to make all these mental gymnastics about the noble purpose of this policy that when you really just put it down on paper is just discrimination. Maybe it's discrimination for a noble purpose, but it's just discrimination. What they do is they talk themselves into the wrong side of an 80-20 issue. And they did that a lot in the last.
Yeah, but I'll be honest with you. Like we've looked at
you ever heard Obama talk about immigration?
Yeah, he was relatively hawkish at the time, but that was also. But to be fair,
Democrats, they would win.
But to be fair, that was that's damn near 20 years ago. That's 18 years ago when America was more conservative generally as a proposition. So I don't disagree with you that Obama was overall, he was certainly a more conservative president in governance than President Biden. But like even this 80-20 issue, it's always interesting to me because if you look at polling issues on this, Trump is underwater on virtually every major policy area. And like say what Democrats, their approval rating is low, but we've seen studies that do this. We've seen there have been so many cases where if you blind test the policy issues, liberal policy is more popular than conservative policy. Yeah. It just is.
Well, no, but
so that's what I'm saying. Like, this is like even I take your point about the 80-20 rule, but I think it's a bit reductive because I'm like, Trump is on the wrong side of popular issues more often than Democrats are. If you just blind test, if you take personalities out, again, taxing the rich, who's on the wrong fucking side of that? Trump, never a Democrat. Democrats are always on the popular side of that. Yes, gender reassignment surgery in minors. Yes, conservatives have a huge advantage there. But if you look at
illegal though, but yeah,
if you look at 10 policy issues, 10 major policy issues with respect to economics and social issues, again, I'll bet $20 on that. You blind test those, the Democratic Party's positions on paper are more popular than the Republican Party's positions on paper. So I think it's a bit reductive to say how Democrats find themselves.
They need to get out of their own way. Like, I think that they became addicted to Trump, amongst other problems. And one side effect of that is it's given Trump de facto control over their messaging, because everything is about him. And I think that when Democrats are most effective, at least the Democrats that I really remember fondly remember voting for, were big personalities who came across as both common sensey and the smartest guy in the room. And
I think, yeah, I take your point.
Combination for Democrats.
Yeah,
So,
I take your point. Listen, I appreciate it. I'm going to let you go. I take this, like, I appreciate you giving my answer. I take this as a half victory in terms of what I was hoping to elicit. You do acknowledge that Trump is worse on this. That is movement in that area. Unfortunately, I didn't get you quite where I wanted you, which was that you would, if the election were held tomorrow, you would have preferred the Democrats, knowing now what you did not know then. But again, this is progress.
6 hours of Peace Coast tape on that too, so we can have
No,
fun.
well, I'm looking forward to your next exchange. But listen, Ryan, we disagree vociferously. We will continue to be passive aggressive on Twitter. I know you're okay with it. Just be prepared for it, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. Thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure. Good talking to you.
All right, man. Have a good one. All right, chat. I am about to start Live and Learn on a separate thing. So this stream is going to end. Join me on Live and Learn. It's going to kick off in the next 2 minutes, as a matter of fact. I will drop the link here. If you just go to my YouTube channel and look under the live section, it's going to be there. It's going to start in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. The stream's end. Refresh. Go to my YouTube page, live.